All right, welcome to the Small Group Leader Resource Podcast. We have a special guest with us today.
Yep.
The chairman of the deacons himself.
Yep.
Mr. John Edwards.
Yeah. Our own personal Volvo equipment salesman.
Exactly.
So, yep.
Thank you for having me.
We have a lot in the discussion guide has a lot of questions about Volvo equipment, so we thought you were the guy.
This is when Paul was founding Volvo.
Yeah.
The Apostle Paul.
There we go. All right. This is for 1 Corinthians 7, 25 through 40. The title of the sermon is The Appointed Time for Sunday, February 22nd, the year 2026, in the year of our Lord. Week 8. Okay. And, Michael, you have an icebreaker for us?
Yeah, I have an icebreaker. We did this one a couple weeks in my group, and it was good. But it was what is a food that you really like, but other people think is maybe disgusting? And it wasn't a great icebreaker for me because there's really nothing. There's almost zero foods that I would not try multiple times to make sure my opinion was solid on that food.
Remembering correctly that you tried German Shepherd in Korea, or you had the opportunity.
No, I was in China. Yeah.
Oh yeah.
It was. Yep. We ordered soup, and it was when I lived in China. I lived north of North Korea, and we ordered soup with meat in it, and from a Korean restaurant, and
Korean restaurant. Okay, that's why. That's the detail.
And it was, the plating skills were actually pretty creative because there were two paws sticking out of the bowl like that.
So you had noodles and poodles.
Exactly. That's what it was.
That's why we brought you on the podcast right there.
Done. Good job. Man, this is going to be good.
I can already tell. Oh, goodness.
Yeah, so the icebreaker is, what is a food that you find just absolutely amazing that others might find disgusting?
What were some examples that they gave? Because I'm having trouble. I'm kind of like you all eat pretty much anything.
Yeah, so some of them were like Jello salads. Most of them were like old grandmother Southern food, I think is what it was. Some of them were like the salad with the pear with the Miracle Whip and the cheese and the black olives, that sort of thing.
That was every Tuesday night at my house.
Exactly, yeah. I would some people said deviled eggs, and I'm like, I could eat.
Everybody loves deviled eggs.
No, everybody loves deviled eggs. So,
all right, so a dish we had a lot growing up that most everybody around me now finds repulsive is sauerkraut and weenies. And you could tell what kind of month it was if you had the red hot dogs or if you had Oscar Mayer.
There you go.
Nice.
So, yeah.
Yeah, that sounds good to me. I'd eat that. What do people not like?
So I thought of a different one. Is like, what is the worst thing that you have ever had?
This was actually okay. Here's an answer that people probably is gonna for your first question. We went on a mission trip to Laredo, Texas, which is basically being in Mexico while still being in the United States, and the food was awesome. They cooked for us like traditional Mexican food, and they made us like a chicken noodle soup, and it was really good. But there were unidentified pieces of meat in there. They were like, I'm not sure I really recognize that. And one of the guys there, he told us he saw thawing in the kitchen sink earlier that day was a bag of chicken hearts. And so some people I think would be pretty turned off by eating chicken hearts, but it was really good. It was kind of like chicken bubble gum. They were a little chewier than the other meat, but I'd eat it again for sure.
Yeah. Probably the one thing that I attempted to eat, but I just could not get it down. It was jellyfish, but it was like blended up and poured into the mold of like this baby sea turtle. So it was like jellyfish that looked like a sea turtle, and it had I guess it had like gelatin mixed in it, or maybe that's where gelatin comes from, is jellyfish.
I don't think so. I don't think that's scientifically how it works.
But it was like a Jello mold of jellyfish, and it was like the one thing ever that I I just couldn't do it.
Yeah, traveling in Asia, you really have the trump card on this conversation.
Yeah.
You've had some serious opportunities. It makes like grandma's southern salad, 7-layer salad or whatever, doesn't compare to jellyfish in the shape of sea turtles.
Yeah. But but that's like the one thing. What about you, John?
Okay, so as you can tell by looking at me, there's not a lot I don't like to eat. My dad used to call me Mikey. But we were in North Dakota visiting relatives one time, and they had something called frog eye salad, and it's made with a certain kind of small pasta and all. I just couldn't get over the name. Right? And it was small, round pasta, and it had something else in it, probably mayonnaise and something else. I just couldn't get through it. That's probably the one thing I've been served that I just couldn't eat. It pales in comparison to jellyfish in the shape of a sea turtle.
Yeah. Sea turtle is cute too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think I would have struggled with the dog with the paws. I would have struggled with that, but I don't know. I can't think of anything that I can think of things I've eaten that I didn't want to eat, but I got them down. So I don't know.
Yeah. Even there's this sauce in Vietnam, like that they take and they like put raw shrimp into a clay pot and they bury it. They call it it's like 7-year purple sauce or something like that. But they bury it in a pot until the shrimp itself like ferments into this purple color, and then they just put it on everything. And the stuff is delicious. It's great.
That's fermented meat's another. I haven't had the chance to try it, but I've seen that on the internet where it's like there's somewhere in Eastern Europe where they ferment like anchovies or something like that, and you open it up and it's like the smell is that probably would be difficult. We're recording this during lunch hour, so maybe this is actually helpful for us. We'll be more focused on the task at hand instead of lunch. So let's get started. That being said, good icebreaker. Actually, our first question, if you want to, it's more of an activity, and then you can kind of use that as your icebreaker as you want. We probably will not do the activity since it's passing a ball and we're all within arm's reach of each other. That might be a little underwhelming of an activity for you to watch on the internet. But that being said, let's begin with reading the text. It's kind of a longer passage, so hold on. And there's some couple difficult moments in it, so hold on. Here we go.
You want me to read the whole thing?
Yeah.
Okay. This is 1 Corinthians 7, starting in verse 25.
Well, since it's long, why don't you read just the first section, and then I'll explain it with the point, and then you can read the second.
That'll be good.
Yeah.
Now concerning the betrothed, I have no command from the Lord, but I give my judgment as one by the Lord's mercy is trustworthy. I think that in view of the present distress, it is good for a person to remain as he is. Are you bound to a wife? Do not seek to be free. Are you free from a wife? Do not seek a wife. But if you do marry, you have not sinned. And if a betrothed woman marries, she has not sinned. Yet those who marry will have worldly troubles, and I would spare you that. This is what I mean, brothers. The appointed time has grown very short. From now on, let those who have wives live as though they had none. Let those who mourn as though they were not mourning, as those who rejoice as those who were not rejoicing, as those who buy as those who as though they had no goods, and those who deal with the world as though they had no dealings with it. For the present form of this world is passing away.
All right, so this is a really interesting passage, and so I'm going to have to try hard not to preach it twice. But the first point is the urgency of the Christian message compels us to evaluate the kingdom effectiveness of all aspects of our lives. Now, to just point out a couple interesting things in the passage, the word which the ESV translates to betrothed is literally virgins. But as we work our way through the whole passage, it does seem pretty clear that Paul is addressing people who are engaged. he began chapter 7 by saying, now I'm going to address questions that you have for me. And then he's using this phrase, now concerning, a couple times throughout the next couple of chapters, saying, you also have a question on this, you also have a question on this. And so they've been, in general, asking questions about marriage, about singleness, and about sex. And so apparently one of the questions they had was, okay, you say that there is a benefit, a kingdom benefit to singleness, right? And but what about me if I'm already engaged? Is it more faithful for me to continue with the marriage, or is it more faithful for me to break off the marriage? That seems to be the question that's inspiring the section here. So even though it's using the word literally virgins, and there was actually a Greek word that he could have used for engaged, we would take that to mean that he is saying that if you're going to remain unmarried, and you're going to do that in a holy way, that includes chastity. The only way you can be a single person and please the Lord is if that comes with chastity. So that's why he kind of uses unusual language in this section. But the other interesting thing is he talks here about the present distress. Now, a lot of people connect that to the return of Christ. He is, of course, referring, as we saw later, the present form of this world is passing away. The appointed time has grown very short. Now, that is language referring to the return of Christ, the end of human history as we know it. But the present distress is not referring to the imminent return of Christ. A lot of people read it that way, but if you think about it, that interpretation falls apart pretty quickly, because his encouragement is ultimately, if you are single, there's a benefit to staying single, because someone would say, because Christ is imminently returning. Well, what's the problem with that? It's been 2,000 years and Christ has still not returned, which means Paul was A, wrong about the return of Christ, and B, everyone who followed his advice and stayed single because they thought it was a benefit to the kingdom were wrong as well. They did it in vain, because it specifically says, in view of the present distress, meaning because Christ is imminently returning. He has not yet returned. So that means they would have done all that for no reason. So instead, a better understanding this is, as we look at every other time that Paul uses the word present, it's like 3 or 4 other times in the New Testament. While that word can be translated to mean imminent, it can also mean right here, right now. And every other time Paul uses that word, he means right here, right now, not imminent. And so what he's referring to is something that is happening, at least in Corinth, if not in the Roman Empire, right here, right now, that would make becoming married that much more of a financial and familial burden than it already normally is. And historically, we know that there was a major famine in the Roman Empire that reached its peak of difficulty in Corinth in 51 AD, which is when Paul was planting the church in Corinth. And so probably he's referring to a major famine that is still really bad in Corinth.
How is that tied to like 2 Corinthians, like the 2 Corinthians 8 and 9, where he goes to the Macedonian churches to gather the collection for the saints in Jerusalem? Is that same event?
Probably the same famine, the same general time frame when it's across the Roman Empire, but we know it was especially bad in Corinth when Paul was there. And so this is not unrelated to the return of Christ, but instead what he's saying is this present distress, this famine, is a pretty good illustration of the mindset that we should have all the time, because we know Christ is returning. Okay, so the present distress does make it particularly difficult, or that much more of a burden to become married. But ultimately, he's pointing them forward to a bigger thing, which is the return of Christ. And he says, because of the return of Christ. Oh, I'm looking at the wrong screen, so you can't see what I'm pointing at. The appointed time, referring to the return of Christ. The present form of the world is passing away, talking about the return of Christ. So because Jesus is coming back, that means we need to reevaluate our lives entirely. That means that the urgency of the Christian mission compels us to evaluate the kingdom effectiveness of all aspects of our lives. Mm-hmm. Not only singleness and marriage, but everything else.
Okay.
All right, I think we can. The rest we can go a little faster. So, because John has a dentist appointment to get to, so we can't take forever on this. Verse 32.
I want you to be free from anxieties. The unmarried man is anxious about the things of the Lord, how to please the Lord. But the married man is anxious about worldly things, how to please his wife, and his interests are divided. And the unmarried or betrothed woman is anxious about the things of the Lord, about how to be holy in body and spirit. But the married woman is anxious about worldly things, how to please her husband. I say this not for your own benefit. Or I say this for your own, I'm sorry, not trying to add words to it.
Yeah.
I say this for your own benefit, not to lay any restraint upon you, but to promote good order and to secure your undivided devotion to the Lord. You want me to keep going?
No, I'll give you the second point. The second point is single Christians have unique kingdom effectiveness opportunities. And so we're going to work our way through that in the discussion, so we don't need to belabor it too much right now. But he's talking about being anxious or being concerned about pleasing God, and how in married life and in having a family, that can divide your interest, can divide your devotion, your dedication. All right, now keep going.
If anyone thinks he is not behaving properly towards his betrothed, if his passions are strong, and it has to be, let him do as he wishes. Let him marry. It is no sin. But whoever is firmly established in his heart, being under no necessity, but having his desire under control, and has determined this in his heart, to keep her as his betrothed, he will do well. So then, he who marries his betrothed does well, and he who refrains from marriage will do even better. A wife is bound to her husband as long as he lives, but if her husband dies, she is free to be married to whom she wishes, only in the Lord. Yet in my judgment, she is happier if she remains as she is, and I think that I too have the Spirit of God.
All right, so the third point is that faithfulness, purity, and self-control are necessary for our kingdom effectiveness. As Paul was encouraging the engaged person to consider whether to finalize the marriage and get married or not, he has him consider those three categories: faithfulness, self-control, and purity. And he's saying, whatever, either marriage or singleness, in order to be effective for God's kingdom, you have to be faithful, you have to be pure, and you have to have self-control. Now, one other interesting thing to note from this text is this phrase where he who does marry does well, but he who refrains from marriage will do even better. That's an interesting phrase because the Bible clearly has kingdom purposes for marriage, right? And so, also if we look at, I think it's 2 Timothy, 1 Timothy 5, where Paul wrote, encourage the young widows to marry. That's actually a different instruction than what he gives right here to the young widows. And so what that would give is the indication that some of Paul's instruction here is contextual to the present distress, to the famine, whereas 1 Timothy is written about a decade later when there was no more famine. And so this is not him saying, if you got married and have kids, you can't truly be effective at building God's kingdom. It was him saying there is meaning and purpose in both, but under the current present distress, there is particular difficulty with marriage. And so that's just something interesting to keep in mind. It doesn't really change the big point. The main truths kind of still all stay the same. So let's return to point number 1. The urgency of the Christian mission compels us to evaluate the kingdom effectiveness of all aspects of our lives. So, question A, as an opening activity, have the group play a couple rounds of hot potato. I then explained what hot potato is because I assumed maybe some people don't know what hot potato is. Would everybody knows what hot potato is? I didn't need to explain it. I could have saved the room on the page.
I think you should just take a potato and just...
We supply a potato for every small group.
Or have potatoes for dinner that night and just one that is left over.
An actual hot potato.
Yeah.
Have the leaders start a countdown timer. Oh, a typo in the second sentence. Man. And don't tell the group how long the timer is. While the timer is counting down, the group will pass around a ball or wadded piece of paper. The last person to have touched the ball or paper when the timer goes off loses. And then I want you to discuss that game is an illustration of this principle. How does it feel when you're holding the ball or paper and you don't know how much time is left? Because people are obviously everybody's very competitive. They don't want to lose, right?
Yeah.
Your wife would not want to lose.
She would not. No,
My
she
wife
would not lose.
I don't know who's more competitive. They might compete over who's more competitive, your wife and my wife.
It's probably true.
Really?
Yes.
I don't
Catherine,
see that in Catherine.
Catherine and Rachel, my sister-in-law, are head and shoulders the two most competitive people in our whole family. Yeah.
For Meg, it somewhat depends upon the context. Some games she just wouldn't care, but some games she's, definitely competitive. So how does it feel when you're holding the ball?
When I was 8 and played this last time I played it, I was very anxious.
There you go.
Yeah.
Good. That's the answer I'm looking for.
Yeah.
So why were you anxious?
I come from a long line of anxious people.
No, because
it's my dad's fault.
Because you don't know how much time is left, right?
Yeah, but isn't that a symbolism for life?
That's where we're driving.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's exactly right.
Know?
Man.
Yep.
It sure is. Yeah, I was anxious because I didn't know what I was supposed to be anxious about. I didn't know.
Yeah, but your perspective on this game and my perspective on this game is a little different.
How so?
Because I probably don't have as much time left as you do to play the game.
Your timer's been counting for longer.
Yeah, I've had to wind the spring quite a few times.
That shows how old you are, because we don't know what timer uses a spring.
Oh, sorry.
Oh, like one of those kitchen, like an egg timer.
Yeah, something like that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, there you go. I just say to my Apple Watch, hey, start a 5-minute timer. That's how I do it.
Hey, Alexa.
Yeah.
Turn the timer over.
So I know this is a little bit of a goofy thing, and it's the first time we've ever done an activity as a question. So maybe I was just channeling my former youth pastor days. But I think even if you don't even end up doing the activity, people can kind of imagine and understand where we're going with this.
Yeah.
If you have concern over, I don't know when the timer ends, I don't want to be holding this ball, you can imagine that we should have a similar concern. I mean, Paul uses the word anxiety, but it's concern. It's not, because we're not meant to live in anxiety. So that's not the best translation, in my opinion. But we are supposed to have a concern. We are supposed to give attention to the reality. We never know how much time is left. Right. So to prove that, we got James 4:13 through 14. John, you can go first.
Read it?
Yeah.
Okay. Thanks for having large print. Come now, you who say, today or tomorrow we will go into such and such a town and spend a year, and there and trade and make a profit. Yet you do not know what tomorrow will bring. What is your life? For you are a mist that appears for a little time and then vanishes.
All right, so though it's a silly game, how does hot potato accurately represent our lives?
Because we're not promised tomorrow.
Yeah. Because the small group leader didn't tell you how much time the timer was, nobody knows, right? Mm-hmm. And the reality is we all like to think, I'm going to live, my grandma was 99 when she died. That sounds pretty good, right? And she was sharp and able, and we all like that idea. But the reality is none of us are promised tomorrow.
The next verse is the one that says, don't say I will do such and such tomorrow, but say only if the Lord wills.
The Lord wills.
Yeah.
So like in when you're around seminary people, like they always make sure they hedge the end of their sentences by saying, see you tomorrow if the Lord wills it, which always kind of sounded like a threat.
I think your seminary had a slightly different theological bent than mine did. Nobody did that at my seminary.
So I worked at a coffee shop, and so when we would take people's order, we would say, all right, 1 large coffee, we'll see you at the window if the Lord wills it. We were right next to a train track, so it made it sound like the train was about to come and destroy them. So,
but it's an important truth. I think as parents, it's kind of, I remember when Layla and Kingston first came to live with us, Layla had a lot of anxiety about going to sleep and what if I don't wake up? And part of me wanted to say, baby, you're 6. You got so many years left. But I knew the biblical truth was we don't actually know. I can't promise to her that she has a certain number of years and so maybe maybe someone would tell me this is bad parenting, but I would tell her something like, God's in control of how many days you live. You'll live exactly as many days as God wants you to live. And that seemed to help her feel more comfortable.
Yeah.
But it's meant to, just what the sermon point is. We've been given an urgent mission. If you have been given an urgent mission and you don't know how much time you have to accomplish that mission, how wise is it to delay in working towards that mission?
You'd feel like, time is wasted if I'm not dedicating these hours that God has given me to do something for his kingdom.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So that's a good transition for the Ephesians 5 passage.
Ephesians 5 says, look carefully then how you walk, not as unwise, but as wise, making the best use of time, because the days are evil. Therefore, do not be foolish, but understand what the will of the Lord is.
The days are evil was such an interesting way for Paul to say that. But really what he's saying is it's very easy to waste your lives. It's very easy to waste your days, and that is not a godly choice. So why is constant evaluation of how we use our lives a necessary discipline for a Christian? And then as a follow-up, what are some of the common ways we waste the days God has given us?
Self-accountability is really important. If you're working for the kingdom and at the same time you're working in the secular world and business enterprise, self-accountability is what keeps you focused, right? Having written goals, if the Lord wills, of course, having written goals down about what you want to achieve are really important. But a lot of times what's more important is to pray for his vision, so that as we walk through each day, we walk as wise with God's counsel with us. So when we see people through his eyes, sometimes the plans that we had made for ourselves need a pause to take care of the things or a particular situation that he calls us to at the time. And I think the wise walk in that way.
Yeah.
And make sure that we, I don't never really care for the word margin, but leave some time for God to move through us to his people and to his creation.
Yeah. I agree, John. I think even what you said, like in comforting Layla in that distress, like that's a good use of time, is to point your attention to the character of who God is and not who we are.
Yeah. The example I think of is very nerdy. I grew up playing sports and I grew up playing outside, rode my bike and all that stuff, but I also grew up playing video games. And when I got into high school is when they started having this feature where they would show you how many hours you spent on each game. Like growing up, like when it's just a PlayStation, you don't know that. But then all of a sudden in high school, there's this very clear demonstration. There's this list of games on your computer and it says this many hours or even days spent on this game and this game and this game. And I even remember not even being like, I was a Christian, but I wasn't like super active in my faith or whatever at this point. But then having my friends who had spent like months and months and months on one game in particular, and me thinking like, I can't do that. Like I can't, that's not, and even today, like, I'll sometimes like a YouTube advertisement will show me a new video game that's coming out, and I'm think like, I can't afford to do that because it's going to be too much fun and I'm going to spend way too much time doing it. It's like you'd have to sell me a boring video game at this point in my life because I don't have time to invest days and days and days into beating this game or whatever.
Yeah.
And so that's why I don't really play video games ever anymore. Sometimes with my kids, every so often as a way of like hanging out with them. But it's because it's like, that's just, I can't spend my life that way.
Well, that's why even like the practical advice of not looking at your phone in the morning time. Like, cause I'll usually like get out of bed, start making coffee, and when the coffee is brewing, realize that I've just wasted 20 minutes, 30 minutes looking at dumb videos or something on my phone instead of like how well that time could have been invested in why I woke up early was to spend time with the Lord. And how many collective days and hours have I done that stupid thing that could have focused my attention on God? And
it's funny to me that young people, the term for that now is they call it doom scrolling, which is like they recognize how bad it is for them, but because they call it that, doom scrolling, but we still do it. Like, so even a young person today is like, I know scrolling on my phone is terrible for me, but I can't stop.
Well, and the danger is, and it applies to all things in life, but in regards to electronic media now with smartphones, is the algorithms built. So if you spend a certain amount of time watching a stupid YouTube video or a reel, and all of a sudden your feed gets flooded with that, and it piques your interest, and they become rabbit holes. Mm-hmm. But that's like anything, right?
Yeah.
That's like anything you can do that will take you away from what you need to be doing.
Yeah, I saw. It was a stand-up comedian who was talking about this, but it was pretty wise. He's like, the last frontier of consumerism is your time. The last thing they're trying to get from you is to capitalize on all of your time, and that's why phones and devices are designed to just suck you in and to keep you there. And that's, I don't want to like over spiritualize everything, and I'm not here to say that capitalism is from Satan or anything like that, but the consumerist mindset is that can be a tool of Satan, that he knows, well, if I can suck people into their phones, they're certainly not building the kingdom. Yeah. And so it's basically any invention can be turned towards evil or towards good, and the wasting of our days. Take Ephesians 5 as the proof there. The wasting of your days is an evil thing.
Yeah. That's the reality of the present time that we live in, is we are still living in the presence of sin. Even though we've been set free from it, we still wrestle and struggle through sin. And so we can still be distracted by things that could have been made for the most virtuous of intents, can be used for evil purposes too.
Yeah, it was the person who invented the way of synthesizing nitrogen for the first time. They used to, this is crazy, they used to, if they needed nitrogen, they would go to islands and they would collect bird poop. That was the way they did it. And then the guy who figured out how to do it so that we could fertilize our fields, so that's the guy who invented dynamite and explosives. And so like that invention has saved way more lives because of modern agriculture, but it also killed tons of lives because of using explosives in warfare. So that one invention, the synthesization of nitrogen, can be turned for evil or turned for good. Okay, reread verse 26. This is question A3.
Verse 26, that's you, John.
I think that in view of the present distress, it is good for a person to remain as he is.
All right. So from the sermon, what did we learn may have been the present distress Paul was referring to, and it was potentially a famine. There's good historical evidence to think that it's a famine. It could have just been also the difficulty of being a Christian in Rome, in first century Rome. But the question I want us to actually talk about is, why are difficult or distressing circumstances so good at making us examine what really matters in life? And then, do you have any examples from your life of when a present distress helped to reprioritize God's kingdom? So, small group leaders, those are two pretty big questions. You might take them in one at a time. I just ran out of room on the page. Yeah. Because if we were passing up all around, I guess that was more important.
You know, when we face difficult and distressing circumstances, oftentimes we have to make a decision, right? How am I going to let this affect me? How am I going to walk through this? What is my posture in this going to be? Who am I going to allow to speak into this situation as it pertains to my life? And I can guess Paul was probably some of what was behind when he was telling them, hey, if you're single, remain single, right? You know, because culturally, I'm not as fluent in what they were going through culturally, but if you look at today's culture, if we had a famine and things going on, right, and it was a really distressing time, and I'm a young male believer, and I'm betrothed, or I want to become betrothed. If I get married, that means I have to start my own family. It means I have to have my own house. I got to start building my own herd, and those things might not have been really possible or easily accomplished during that time. So it would have been taking him away from the things that Paul was calling him to do, to make disciples, to build the early church. And so I've been through some, distressing times, and you get to the point to where in one particular situation, I had to get to the point that it was a situation I couldn't fix. Yeah. There was absolutely nothing I could do to change it. I just had to trust in God at that moment and just give it to him. Did it hurt? Yeah. It was probably the most gut-wrenching time of my life. And yet still I had to come to a peace about it. And through his grace, that peace came, pretty quick when I needed it. But it forces you to prioritize God's kingdom, and be thankful in that situation that person was a part of his kingdom. Yeah. Because when you get to those typical points in life, that becomes the main thing. Yeah.
I think when I read this question, and John, I'm glad you're on the podcast today, because it was back in late July of last summer. There was a 2-week period where 5 of our members passed away in a 2-week period. And that was a particularly hard time. And it was just tough for our church. And I was going through a season of depression during that time. And I feel like even like going into that, I was going through a season of depression. But even like, I feel like some of those times and some of those conversations I had with family, and times that we spent at the hospital praying with people during that time, just helped solidify my calling as pastor. Like, God has called me to do this. I can be useful for his purposes. Like, he is the one who can give me strength to do this. It is not a work of me. It is something that he's called me to, and it's not fun work, but it has to be done for the sake of the gospel. And then too, just the beautiful gospel emphasis that can be placed central in a funeral service for someone who is a faithful believer. I feel like that when I read that question, that's the time that I thought of with those 2 weeks this past summer.
Yeah, those discussions, when you have those discussions with people, and you're walking through those situations with people, they aren't just platitudes. They're truths. Mm-hmm. right? Even in the hard walk, it's still true. In the easy walk, it's still truth. Truth doesn't change. And as a guy who used to work with me said one time, going through some stuff, he goes, John, just remember, time is the friend of truth. And as you walk the paths, then you realize that a lot more.
Yeah, and when you do go through a present distress, that is it forces you to evaluate what really matters, what's most important. All of a sudden, whatever doom scrolling or whatever video games or whatever it was, or that TV show, you're like, wow, this it seems so weak and small and shallow and insignificant, and you're like, if life really is so uncertain, then this is not how I should be spending my time. With Kinsey's kidney condition right now, which is kind of like a tough thing. She keeps relapsing, going back on medicine, and they're considering other stuff to consider. But it does make you think, like, would I, if I have, we certainly have a limited number of days on this earth with our children, and so that is absolutely a reality. And so it's like, it makes those times whenever you could be spending time with them, and maybe you were on your phone or something else, you're like, oh, what a foolish way to waste that time.
But isn't that true with any sin?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And it just, obviously no one likes going through present distress, but God uses it.
Yep.
All right, question B. In verses 29 through 31, Paul briefly gave examples from everyday life of how a person with a kingdom focus should live differently. As a group, expand on each of these 5 examples. How should our kingdom focus change the way a believer approaches these life situations? Feel free to break up into 5 smaller groups to discuss if needed. And so we don't have time to really, you could expand on these a ton, but let's just kind of like take each one and give our first thought on it. And understand what Paul is doing here when he says, let those who have wives live as though they had none. He doesn't mean that literally. He's not saying, okay, get
Cool.
Because
I was about to say something really dumb then.
Okay. Well, because he that would directly contradict what he has already told us many times in this passage, right? Mm-hmm. Or in chapter 7 anyway. But instead he's saying, reevaluate the urgency of the mission. Consider how you can live your life in the most effective way for God's kingdom. And so, when it comes to our marriages, how should we be considering what's most effective for God's kingdom?
Use our marriages for co-labor together for the gospel.
This and this gets to teaching of our children and those around us that we have influence over who are single. This is why it's important to be equally yoked.
Mm-hmm. Yep, great point.
And it's a discussion that even married couples should have about their walk with Christ, and their walk with Christ individually, and their walk with Christ as a couple. Now, I'm very blessed that my wife is very understanding if I need to do something for somebody, right?
Yep.
And she has come alongside of me so many times to help in those situations, and situations where, depending on the situation, she's a better fit for it than I am. And so it's important for us to understand that just because we're believers and we're married, we don't live 2 separate lives. We don't live a church life and a married life. We should be living a combined marriage that's, like you said, that serves the kingdom and works to grow the kingdom.
Yeah. Catherine is a much better judge at what is an actual emergency within my job than I am. Like, so if I get a call and it's about a properties thing, she'll say that can wait. Or if it's about someone in the hospital, she says, no, you need to go and see them. So she's a I mean, it's God's Spirit working in her, but she is a better judge than I am of that.
And really, they are only gracious and helpful in those ways because they are believers and they understand the urgency of God's kingdom, right? And they also understand how God uses families and marriages to build God's kingdom. And so she's not going to let you compromise your kingdom effectiveness within your family in order to be effective at the church. Yeah. You have to hold both of those things in balance. All right, those who mourn as though they were not mourning. So how does our focus on the kingdom change that? Our mourning.
That we find true joy in God's sovereignty and his character, that we trust that even if awful things are happening, that God could use those things for his purpose, good purposes.
We also do not mourn as those without hope.
Yep.
Because to lose a child would be a terrible thing, but you know that child would actually be in God's kingdom, or gathered around the throne, worshiping him. That would actually be what that child was made to do. And those who rejoice as though they were not rejoicing. Thoughts on that one?
Just that we don't rejoice in earthly things. We only rejoice in what things that are truly good and pure and beautiful.
Yeah, in all of these, he's asking us to consider how the world typically does these things, and then how a Christian who's focused on the kingdom should do them differently. So the world would rejoice in things that we would go, that's not actually of eternal significance. I'm not saying it's a bad thing or we shouldn't be happy, but we should be most interested in the things that have eternal significance. Those who buy as though they had no goods. And then probably same category, those who deal with the world as though they had no dealings with it.
Store up your treasures in heaven.
Yeah, because the present form of the world is passing away.
Yeah.
So the world is the world, we can go, yeah, I got this new toy, or I have more in my bank account, and we would go, yeah, but that's not eternal. That's not lasting. Yeah. That's passing away.
What's the old Baptist funeral joke? You never see a U-Haul behind a hearse.
Yeah. True. You know, it's amazing to me. I've heard people say before, well, you know, you didn't need to buy X. We could have taken that money and fed the poor. Just like, you know, hey, what's the whole deal with the alabaster jar?
Yeah.
Right? But I look at people and say, okay, so do you really even need a house? No, you want a house. A house provides you with some measure of security and comfort. So then does that mean then when you start dealing with those things, your trust level that God will provide your needs on a daily basis decreases some? And we have to be real careful. There's a fine line. So when I read that was what kind of stood out to me, was Paul was telling them, look, your dependence is on God.
Yep.
Right? Live somewhat somber as we work together to build the kingdom and build the church.
Leverage every single thing that you have for the Lord and his. I mean, if you have a nice house, use it for the glory of God, you know?
Yep. Good stuff. All right. Read some or all of these verses. For the sake of time, let's just read just the Acts 2:17. They're really all saying the same thing. But what I wanted to demonstrate was that the apostles, at least every single one, you know, we've got Peter, we've got the author of Hebrews, we've got Paul, we've got James, we've got Peter again, we've got John. That's a pretty good representation of the apostles. Mm-hmm. They all have the same opinion. They all talk about Christ coming in the same way. So I didn't want you to think, oh, this is just Paul's opinion. This is the universal opinion of the apostles, which is Acts 2:17 is a good representation.
All right. It says, and in the last day it shall be, God declares, that I will pour out my spirit on all flesh, and your sons and your daughters shall prophesy, and your young men shall see visions, and your old men shall dream dreams. So
has that happened? Has God poured out his spirit on his people?
Yes, he has.
Mm-hmm. Which means that we are in the beginning of that verse, the very beginning. We are in the last
days.
The last days, right? So
I was going to say that we are Pentecostal.
No. So was Peter who's
In a
preaching?
sense, it means-
Yeah, it does. So Peter was preaching there. Is Peter wrong? He said that they were in the last days, and it's been 2,000 years. How many last days are there? So and all of these passages are going to say something similar. So are the apostles wrong?
Do you have that book of charts? And I'll show you exactly what he means.
If they're not wrong, which just here's a pro tip. The apostles are not wrong. That's always the right answer, okay? The Bible's not wrong. Then what are they actually saying in these types of passages?
That God has revealed himself to us through his son, that his promise was to his people, Israel, was to send them a rescuer, a redeemer, a savior, Messiah that would come and rescue them, and God would dwell among them, and that has happened.
Sure,
that has been revealed.
Sure, yeah. But what about the last days? What when they use that phrase or similar phrases? What are they saying about the timing of Christ's return? What are they saying about us and where we are in history?
Yeah, that we are still anticipating the return of Christ. That some of that has been revealed, and some of it is yet to be revealed as well.
See, I default back to a day is as 1,000 years, as 1,000 years is as a day.
Yeah, that's good. That's a good answer.
You know, there's some things I just, look, he wants me to work to build his kingdom. I'm not going to worry about if he's coming back next Tuesday afternoon at 3:42 in the morning.
Yeah.
You know, he's got a job for each of us to do. I think the impetus here was, guys, there is a certainty of time. We don't know it.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Yes.
But during this time, as Michael so succinctly said, and I was going to say the same thing, that he would pour out his spirit, which he has. Right. And these things are happening. And I still dream dreams.
Yeah, so we're over literalizing what they say when they say the last days. What they mean is we're in the last period of history. Mm-hmm. We are in the church age. And in fact, in the Corinthians passage, when he says the appointed time has grown short, some translations, the CSB actually says the appointed time, or the time is limited, meaning God has established that this period of time is going to be, and it's going to come to an end. It's almost like your small group leader started that timer when you started passing around that potato. He knew how long that timer was, even though we don't. And so we should all assume that it's a very short timer because our mission is very urgent. And so that's really why they use the shortness of time, the last days. They use that language because they're saying God has established how long this period is. We don't know, but we do know we have an urgent mission. So let's act like he might be coming back right now. Point 2. Single Christians have unique kingdom effectiveness opportunities. What are some real-world examples of the unique opportunities a single person has for building God's kingdom?
They're free from a lot of the constraints that us married folk are. For the mission field, whether local, whether in another country, time-wise, they are fully available. Yep. For God's missional work. Yep.
I think of Michael Anderson giving advice, or maybe more of a kick in the butt, to his son, who understandably, I'm just thinking of a conversation he told me about not that long ago. He went to Garden City, and he's doing ministry there, and he's in school, and he's working, and then he asked him to do something else, and he's like, I'm pretty busy, Dad. And he's like, you're not married. You don't have any kids. You've got time to do it. And he's like, yeah, you're right. And he ended up doing it or whatever. And the reality is that being a good husband, being a good father requires a significant time investment. And it's a significant thing to do. It's an important thing to do. It's not less value. It is a kingdom building activity to be a good father and a good. You trying to play footsie with me, John? I don't know. They can't see that on the camera. I could have just ignored it. I thought they could see it, but it's a significant kingdom thing to be a good father and a good husband. But it's a different kingdom opportunity that is open to a single person because of that time and the resources. A single guy, if I was single, didn't have a wife and kids, I would be living much cheaper. I mean, I had the opportunity to living much cheaper than I currently am, and that would open up financial resources for supporting missions or whatever, yada yada yada.
Yeah, single people are. I mean, you said something similar, John, but going to hard and unreached places, corners of the world, it is much easier to go as a single person, or as a person without children to much more dangerous places.
That's a great example. I'm much more willing to put myself in a dangerous place than to put my children in a dangerous place, because I've been given the God-given responsibility of protecting my children, right? And that's not to say that missionaries aren't doing that or whatever, but it's just a different consideration whenever it's only putting your life in danger rather than putting your children's lives in danger.
Yeah. And even abiding by U.S. government travel restrictions for minors, like submitting to those governing authorities, like it's practically easier.
Yeah. All right. Now, single people, that's not to say that there aren't difficulties with being single. It's a different appointment. Remember, God, from the last passage, God appoints your life. He sets a path before you, and that doesn't mean, oh, yours is easier than mine. It means it's different. It's got parts of it that have different opportunities, parts of it that are more challenging, and so God wants you to consider what path He's put you on, and then to take the opportunities that are available for that path. So, question D1. Though the freedom of singleness provides these kinds of opportunities, what are some examples of how we are tempted to use that freedom to collect toys or luxuries rather than to live simply to the world and radically to Christ? Meaning, as a single guy, I could give significantly more money to missions, or I could have significantly more toys, a much better workshop, a much nicer car. You know what I mean? So just because you have an opportunity doesn't mean you have actually taken that opportunity. How often do we squander those opportunities?
Yep. You could devote time to intentional conversations of discipling others, or you could devote more time to playing more video games or going to more sporting events with your buds. So.
But you could boil that down as simple as you could go through McDonald's and get a senior coffee like $1, or you could go to Starbucks and spend $8. What would you do with the difference? And so a lot of it comes down to obedience to what the Spirit is telling us to do. Right? And that's true for single and for married folk. But for single folk especially, there are times their sense of accomplishment is in some of the things that they own. And so I think it's important for them to understand some of the things that you actually don't take ownership of, but that you can take gratification in, are those that you help lead to the kingdom and those that you disciple. Those are things that you should take a lot of gratification in and endeavor to do.
Yeah, and this is not to say that married people have an excuse for not being, radically sacrificial when it comes to their finances or their time. But I just, in my mind, I can picture people I know who are single young men who got out of college and had a good degree and got a great job and are making good money from the beginning and aren't married, don't have kids, and they're collecting toy after toy after toy, instead of thinking maybe God has given me this resource so I can fund a church planter or something like that. And that's something that a single person, that's a particular freedom that leads to a temptation that they need to be aware of.
Well, it's you can either become a conduit or a collector.
Yeah.
The choice is yours.
Yeah, that's good. All right, question D2. Here's an interesting one. Do you think the church today does a good job of affirming the call to singleness, or does the church today ever make negative assumptions about single people?
To the first question, I'm not sure. I think we could do some serious evaluation on that, and should,
I think a pretty regular feedback I've gotten from people who are single or maybe even feel called to singleness or only are in a season of singleness, meaning God hasn't provided them their spouse yet, they feel somewhat out of place, somewhat, I don't know, neglected is not the right word, but they just don't know exactly where they fit into the paradigm or into the organization. I've had that feedback before.
We have single people in our small group, and they are such a blessing and a joy to have in our small group.
Yeah. And I think
some of they are blessed by being around married people.
Yeah,
too.
I think some of it could be a little bit of a pessimism on the single person's behalf, thinking, "Oh, I can't really fit into this group with married people because I'm not married." So I think it's a kind of the street goes both ways sometimes.
It's important for all church members to understand that the person who is single is most likely single by where they feel God has them at the moment, right? And so as Paul has talked about in Corinthians about, hey, live the life that you have been given, right? As believers, when we see somebody that's single, that's in their mid-20s, to encourage them to see their life through the lens of Christ and not through our own prejudices and our own expectations as if they're our own children, right? And so I think it's important for, like I say, for members to support and encourage anything that we do for ministries that we have for singles, for our college and career, to welcome them into other small groups, to spend time with them. Just, don't treat them as a single believer. Treat them as a believer.
Yeah.
Right? And affirm them in that so that they feel confident in doing the work that God's called them to do without judgmental eyes.
Yeah, because Paul is saying that it is a calling from God. Take that situation in which you are in and leverage everything you have, all the time that you have, every way in which God has made you, and use it for His kingdom. So it's certainly not a lesser calling.
Yeah. So the second part, does the church ever make negative assumptions about a single person? I think I'm thinking of being young in ministry and having friends who were not married and struggled to find ministry positions because there was this assumption that if they're single, they're more dangerous, they're more of a liability. Mm-hmm. Is that a view? Meaning, especially if they're going to be a youth pastor, they're going to come in and hit on our teenage girls.
I guess I could see that. I guess my first ministry positions was in the mission field and around lots of single people, so not necessarily, So,
yeah, I think the church does, from the membership standpoint. They may not express them openly, but privately, they probably have their feelings about, single people in the church.
Well, so whenever you were on the pastor search team, which was clearly led by God and made very wise decisions.
Oh, yeah, thank you.
For anybody who doesn't get that joke, they're the pastor search team that chose me. I'm interested to know, did you come across any candidates who were single and specifically said, I am called to singleness as a kingdom opportunity? Have you ever? I can't think of anybody that I've been to seminary with who expressed specifically a call to singleness because of ministry. I don't know. I can't think of anybody.
I don't know that we had any resumes submitted that expressed that. I'm not sure how many we had that applied that were single.
Yeah, because I wonder if there isn't almost certain. Let me say it this way: if someone was single and they were 40, never been married, and they said biblically, I feel called to singleness, I feel they would almost have to explain that in a resume. Otherwise, someone would go,
There's something wrong with them.
yeah, there's something wrong with it, right?
Why aren't they married by now?
Yeah, exactly.
That's the thought, and that's the thought of several inside the church,
Right.
right?
Yeah.
But if you when you read Paul's letter in Corinthians, that's the path that very well could be the path that person's on.
Yeah.
Right now, does that mean he would be a good fit for any church? Probably not.
Right.
Right, but that person would be a good fit for a church.
Yeah. And I think that I just, part of that question is like helping us to identify those biases against potentially a very biblical calling.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Question E, maybe kind of out of left field here, but this passage from 1 Corinthians is one of the rationales that the Catholic Church uses to require priests to remain single. So in what ways could someone potentially defend that practice from this text, or in what ways would that practice be unfaithful to the text?
We've said this a few weeks in a row, but it's taking ripping verses out of their immediate context. That it is saying this verse that originally did not have a number right beside it means something by itself and not in proportion to the whole thing. So if someone is burning with passion, they should get married. If someone cannot behave properly, let them marry. It is no sin.
Yeah, but to defend it, someone who refrains from marriage will do even better. So someone could read that and think, you can't be the best pastor or the best priest, the Catholic Church would say. You can't be the best pastor that you possibly could be unless you can refrain from marriage. So we only want the top tier pastors, so we need someone who is willing to remain single. We want someone who has these unique kingdom effectiveness opportunities that they lose if they get married.
I don't even want to try to defend it. I'm glad I'm not Catholic.
Yeah, me too. Praise the Lord. And I would say that's we already discussed that Paul's instructions here are somewhat contextual to the famine. And so I would think that the even better part there of remaining single in some parts is related to the context of being in the famine, and that the Bible clearly says demonstrates that marriage and having kids and all that, those are kingdom opportunities that should not for some reason be restricted from the pastoral role.
Yeah, and I think for a lot it's to have leaders in the church whose time and devotions aren't split, who don't have to constantly make decisions about, do I do the church stuff, do I do family stuff, right? And so for a lot, it's easier just to have a hard and fast rule that we're not going to do that, so we automatically take one of those away. Now, you can't take away the burning of the heart.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where the problem comes in.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
You can legislate, you can mandate all you want to, but you cannot take away the burning of the heart. And that's at the crux of the issue.
Yeah. And I think that one way that the Protestant church has tried to balance those positions is by making sure in the selection of a pastor that the pastor's wife is also is a believer, understands the role that a pastor is supposed to serve, so that they can go, yes, I understand that there's a balance that needs to be struck here between it. So whereas we would say we can hire a single pastor, we can't hire a pastor whose wife is an unbeliever. That would be a recipe for disaster, right?
Yeah, when we were interviewing you, we talked about your family dynamic and how you protect your time and shepherd your time so that you don't neglect your family. But in true transparency, we really hired you to get Meg.
Playing the long game. There we go. It worked out.
Yeah.
Good work. Mastermind right there. All right. We're past when we said we would be done with John, so we got to wrap this bad boy up. Faithfulness, purity, and self-control are necessary for kingdom effectiveness. Though singleness provides unique kingdom effectiveness opportunities, how could those opportunities be lost or invalidated if a person struggles to live in faithfulness, purity, or self-control?
Is this where we're going to talk about the Catholic Church more?
Yikes.
Ooh.
Shots fired.
There's a lot of churches.
John was talking around that.
Yeah.
And Michael just
kick the door open,
Just
Michael.
said
Yeah.
There's a lot of churches that you could talk about with this.
For
right now.
sure.
That's
yeah,
true, yeah.
absolutely.
You know?
You're right.
It can really hurt your testimony.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's not.
But that's the
and
same-
specifically,
it's
this
same for
question is
anybody.
not even talking about. I mean, it can refer to pastors,
Sure.
but it can refer to any believer.
Sure.
Yeah. This is connected to where he was talking about, like, why would you take a member of Christ and join it to a prostitute? That any, and I guess sexual desire is such a dynamic way to describe any sort of sinfulness, because it is so quickly acted upon. And so passionately acted upon, and in so many different places, Paul uses that to uses sexual impurities to describe a life that is not aligned towards Christ, but it is that it destroys the faithfulness of the church and the impact of the church.
But in regards to that.
Sorry, I'm just doom scrolling over here.
Reels on that subject.
Yeah.
I remember
I'm looking at a Bible verse, actually.
my grandmother told me something one time, and I'll try to keep it PG rated. That men in general who strive to be successful, who are strong leaders, tend to have a very strong sex drive. And she said, if you look at, and she was naming off certain leaders of the time during her time, and you look at them, you're like, yeah, because they got in trouble because of that, right? And it's no different than for any of us, right? And it is one area that we can struggle with, and when we fall in certain areas, then it does affect. Whether anybody knows it or not, it affects us individually and our ability to walk beside God.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And so we all have to be careful of that. But for single folks who they just seem at times, it can be a real struggle.
Yeah. I think we used this verse in a small group not too long ago, but I'm reminded of it in Romans 2:21 through 24. You then who teach others, do you not teach yourself? While you preach against stealing, do you steal? You who say that one must not commit adultery, do you commit adultery? You who abhor idols, do you rob temples? You who boast in the law, dishonor God by breaking the law. But as it is written, the name of God is blasphemed among the Gentiles because of you. Meaning that if we can waste every single kingdom opportunity if our lifestyle contradicts the gospel message. And so if that means living in faithfulness, purity, and self-control, so that our message is not pure hypocrisy. Yeah. Question G. Let's reread verse 35.
It says, I say this for your own benefit, not to lay any restraint upon you, but to promote good order and to secure your undivided devotion to the Lord.
All right, now this one we won't really talk through too much, but it's going to be a good one for your group to talk through. And really, this one could take so long that maybe you don't have time to do a lot of the other ones. But in all of the different life situations that Paul addressed in chapter 7, the most fundamental question he wanted us to ask is, what will secure your undivided devotion to the Lord? As we think through the various life situations represented in this group, how does that question guide our decision making? when considering major life changes, are there any specific life changes we could discuss together as a group? So as you're thinking through wherever your group is in life, maybe it's getting married, or maybe it's retiring, or maybe it's starting this career, or maybe it's pursuing this major in college, or whatever. Maybe it's having another kid. All of these kinds of major life decisions are supposed to be made through the filter of what will secure my undivided devotion to the Lord. And so that's a huge topic that as a small group you guys can work through. You can ask, what kind of decisions are you considering in your life right now? And how does that filter help you to make that decision? And then so it says, are there any specific life changes we could discuss together as a group? So give it a shot, throw that out there. Let your group kind of help each other counsel and think through those choices and those decisions. Because again, Paul says over and over and over, remain as he is. Like, that's not him saying you can never make changes in your life, but it's to consider that the life that you have has been assigned to you by God. And so you should only be seeking change as he guides and directs in the ways that are most effective for his kingdom.
Yeah. This is going back to that question that we were talking about earlier, what difficult or distressing circumstances make us examine what life matters, but just thinking through just hard times and knowing that difficult times, fiery trials produce in me Christ. It produce in the life of a Christian, produce in me the likeness of the image of Christ. Paul says that, Peter says that in many, many different places. But knowing that, like, within the work of salvation in my life, of sanctification, that is for me to look like Christ, but that is for God's good purposes. Me being sanctified, me being set apart, is so that God could use me for something, so it's not only my getting an A+ on the Christian exam, what I'm supposed to do, but it's that my life would be useful to him wherever I am. And I feel like that's been like the constant refrain or reminder that particularly in chapter 7, that my life, any Christian's life, the life of a faithful Christian church, so either individually or corporate, that they can be used for God's good purposes wherever and whatever he has them in.
Good stuff. All right, here's our challenge. Regardless of what life situation you're currently in, God is giving you kingdom building opportunities. Often these opportunities are specific to where we are in life. This week, ask God to make those opportunities clear to you, and then make a visual list. Maybe you're an artsy, crafty kind of person and you can make it pretty, or maybe it's just a bullet point list that you can stick on your mirror. All right, so make a visual list that displays your kingdom effectiveness opportunities in your home as a reminder and a challenge to leverage your life for his kingdom. And I didn't say this, but maybe take a picture or bring it in so you can share with your group. So for me, top of the list should be my children. I'm called by God to raise godly children. That is a kingdom opportunity, is to produce godly children. So that's one example, but all of our lives are full of those types of opportunities.
And it's really important to take advantage of those opportunities. We don't know. We talked about last days. We don't know the appointed time at which Christ is coming back. We also don't know the appointed time at which we're going to go to him.
Mm-hmm.
So looking at the opportunities, and we're walking through some stuff with somebody right now, and does it take time? Yeah. Does it involve doing things that, if you had an option, you might choose option B, but we have been chosen to be able to walk through that situation. And so when you face that, you can choose to walk through those situations and through the life that he has called for us with one of two attitudes. An attitude of, this is where I am for God's reason, for God's purpose, right, for His glory and for my good, right? It may not be pleasant, but it is for our good.
Yep.
And so, in all of this lesson, for me, is every day is just try to keep that in mind in the decisions and the time that I spend.
Good stuff. All right. Well, thank you guys for being on the podcast.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah.
Well, thanks for being here, John.
Poodles and noodles. I'm gonna remember that one.
Poodles and noodles.
And thank you, small group leaders, for serving the Lord. That is a kingdom opportunity that you are taking advantage of. Good work. Keep it up. And we love you guys. And we'll see you.